Hiya, welcome to Talking Pure Schist. I'm Luisa, your host, also known as Scottish Geologist on social media, that girl that makes videos about rocks. This is Danny, who's going to be joining me. He's going to be helping me out. He knows nothing about geology, so this is going to be fun and games, like once we get into it. And our first episode is going to be on plate tectonics and continental drift.
So
aye.
well done in getting your first podcast live.
Oh, thanks, Danny.
I've got a frog in my throat. So you did one of my podcasts, it was a year ago.
It was indeed, wasn't it?
It was a year ago. So at that point you were working as a geologist on something for Network Rail. So what you been up to?
I've quit my job like in August. Not quit. I left on good terms, of course. It was something I was thinking about like for the last probably since January last year. So I left my job. I started my own business, which is a tour company that I now have, where I take people on geological tours across Scotland. I do obviously the social media side of things still. I still teach people about rocks and that. I'm going to start doing workshops soon. And I've been working on a few projects on the side as well, as obviously getting this up and running with you.
I know, it's fantastic.
There's been loads of things I've been up to. I'm
pregnant.
I'm heavily pregnant right now, and this is the first episode. So 35 weeks, and I don't know how many days now. I lose track every single week. It's dead funny. It just keeps growing. Wee boy I'm having due on the 3rd of March, but you know, you never know. He might make an early appearance. Let's hope it doesn't happen now.
I'll be off.
It's bye, we need to can.
Yeah. I won't even say bye, I'll be off. So are you going to just stick him on your back and continue to climb
definitely.
mountains?
Yeah, stick him in one of those wee baby holster things, and he'll just be like this, and I'll be carrying him about, and I'll be like, check out these rocks. Check out these rocks. We're going to call him Gabriel. So it's a dead nice name, you know. Like I'm set on Gabriel, and I'll just be like introducing him to rocks. And I mean, I'm not going to force it on him. Like, I mean, it'd be cool if he liked dinosaurs and rocks and that. And I mean, I'm not going to make it whatever he wants to be in the future. He can be, but I think that'd be cool. But when it comes to my tours and stuff like that, obviously, I've got like a really supportive family, a really supportive like partner, and when I'm going to be doing these tours again, because I didn't want to take like a whole year off after like the pregnancy. I just decided, right, I'll have a few months off, get myself settled and stuff, get the wee one settled, and then I'll go back to doing tours every now and then. So I've already planned like for this year, like what tours I've got on. Some of them are advertised on my website already. Others I still need to deal with. So yeah.
No, well done. See that somebody doing what you do, quitting a job. And when you knew you were pregnant at the time, I know.
That as well. I found it just before I did it. I was like, what do I do? Oh my goodness.
But see, bravery like that is fantastic, and you're away building your own business, so well done.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Well done. It's well deserved. So where are we starting? It's your podcast, no mine.
Yeah, so we're going to start with plate tectonics and the theory of plate tectonics, which is probably one of the basic things that you kind of need to learn about in geology to have an understanding of geology, I guess, in a way. So I'm going to kind of start it off by talking about the Earth in general and how the Earth is like made up of these rigid plates, right, that move about over geological time. But we kind of have to go back in time.
First question.
On you go.
First question, and I'm going to try not to interrupt. You say geological time all the time. What's the difference between geological time and time? Is it just it's a lot longer?
It's a lot longer. Like, obviously, you're talking millions of years or hundreds of millions of years. That's what I mean when I talk about time in geology.
But is there a scale?
Like,
is geological time a scale?
It's split into, like, a scale. Yeah, there's a geological time scale. I wish I actually had a picture of it that I could show you, but I don't think I do. And the time scale's split up depending on, like, into different geological periods of time. And the Earth is estimated to be, like, 4.6 billion years old, right? And it's split up in each individual period of time, like whether it's an era, an eon, like so on, like it gets proper complicated. And don't get me wrong, as a geologist, I don't know every single one either. I mean, I don't think any geologist knows every single like period of time. I know your main periods of time, but it's all split up depending on what kind of different rock formations you find, like in the rocks records, like that are all grouped together. Like that's how they split it up back in the day. Like so, when I talk about geological time, I'm talking millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. I'm not talking just overnight, like 1,000 years. These processes that we're going to talk about today take millions and millions of years, like hundreds of millions of years to actually like produce an actual something that you can see in the rock record or something that you can see happening today. Well, it just depends, like on where you are. So that's what geological time is.
Thank you.
So for an introduction for everyone. So yeah, it's good to actually that you brought that up, because it's good to get an understanding of that as well, because it doesn't just happen overnight. These processes like take ages, like millions of years, hundreds of millions of years to happen. But like basically, the Earth is like split into these massive rigid plates that move about over geological time. But as like everything in geology, there's a little bit of controversy involved in it. Like, so when you look at a map of the world and you see Africa and America and that, and you kind of look at it and you're like, did they once fit together?
Aye, because it looks like you could push them
It's
back
like a
together.
jigsaw,
Aye.
yeah. And back in the day when they first obviously started coming up with the first maps and that, like they were like, oh, wow, is this like what did they used to, fit together? And people would just be like, no, they didn't. And then other people would be like, oh yeah, like they might have. And once like geologists started like looking into it, and it began with a guy, and like he published a paper in 1912, and it was on continental drift. And this guy's name, he was like a German scientist. This guy's name is Alfred Wegener. I don't know if I said that right, because I know that they don't pronounce their W's in Germany or something like that, or they don't have W in the alphabet. He came up with this kind of the beginning of the theory that all kicked it off, because plate tectonics hasn't been around for ages, like geology as well. Some of the stuff in geology, it's only a recent science that's kind of came to light over the last hundreds of years, like all of these different processes involved in geology, and that have all kind of, all these theories and stuff as well, like have all kind of came to the surface, and it's like, oh my god, we've got a better understanding of Earth now, like than what we did before.
So for a real simpleton like me, so is it basically the crust of the Earth? Is it floating on something?
It kind of is, yeah. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail just once I've finished talking about this Alfred guy, right? So in 1912 he came out with this paper, and he noticed and he studied the rocks at either side of it, and as we spoke about it, like it was like a jigsaw. They both looked like they fitted together at one point. But then when he started looking at the rocks at either side on Africa and on like South America and America, and like realised like, oh well, that fits together with that. These rocks are this similar, they look the same, there's the same fossils on either side, so he kind of fitted it together. But it wasn't until like the 1950s or 1960s it was actually kind of started getting accepted and stuff, because what they had done was they mapped the ocean floor and noticed that there was this massive like mountain range in the middle of the ocean, and they were looking at it like, what the hell's that? And it's like a big massive ridge, like that's basically like opened up, pulled apart, like these two plates have been moving away from each other for a while.
Is that the Mariana Trench or something?
That's another one that we'll talk about, like that's a subduction zone. But this one, like these ridges are where two plates are moving away from each other. They're known as divergent plate boundaries, which we'll go on and speak about like later on as well. And like they basically like mapped this ocean floor in the 1950s, 60s, and then that's when the theory was actually solidified and accepted. Oh my god, plate tectonics, this continental drift, this all makes sense. This is how we can understand how mountains are formed. That's how we can understand how new crust is formed. Like, but moving on to your question, Danny, basically to begin with, like also the Earth's made up of different layers. You've got your inner core, your outer core, your mantle, and then you've got your crust, which is what we're standing on top of right now. You've got two types of crust. You've got oceanic crust, which is new, fresh crust. There's actually pieces of it in the middle of this table. Well, that's fresh lava, is usually kind of erupted out. At oceanic crust, it's very thin, right? And like what happens to oceanic crust is eventually it'll subduct and go under like something like that forms Mariana's Trench. Well, that's a subduction zone, and that's a convergent plate boundary. I'm going to draw them in a minute as well. But basically, like the crust is moving about, like the plates, that make up the crust. They're rigid plates, but they move about very slowly over geological time. And the reason that they move about, and again, like I actually forgot to explain, that what we stand on, like the crust, like is like known as the lithosphere, but also the lithosfere's got a tiny little bit of mantle that sits like underneath us as well, like in the mantle. And people think the mantle's actually molten, but the mantle's not molten. The mantle's actually a solid, but it's a solid that moves very slowly over geological time, right? Like, so wait a minute, I'm gonna get I've got like a wee slide here that hopefully we can bring up on the screen that, oh my God, why is that not working? Hurry up, fingerprint work.
So I always thought it floated in lava.
No, it doesn't. Well,
there you go.
Semi-molten, right? Okay, so I've got this like wee plate. I've got like this. How did I make this bigger? I don't even know, right? I made this up for like a wee talk once upon a time, right? So, obviously this is like a picture like up in this corner, like here, like in the top right hand side of this screen, and it shows you where like the plate boundaries are and stuff. But then down here, like, and down here, like, you notice that those are the Earth's like layers, and you've got obviously the inner core, the outer core, the mantle, and then you've got the asthenosphere, which sits directly on underneath like the lithosphere, and we're on the lithosphere now. The lithosphere is the crust as well as the top layer of the mantle, and those kind of move in tandem because that top layer of the mantle is semi-molten and it does melt every now and then. And obviously when it's melting, when I'm talking about melting, you're talking about like thousands of degrees Celsius when it melts, like it's moving very slowly. But the mantle itself is actually a solid, but it acts more like it's a ductile kind of like layer, like in Earth, where it moves very slowly over geological time through what's known as convection currents, which we can see in this little wee diagram here at the bottom there. Like, those convection currents are kind of like pushing like up the way, like heat rises from the center of the Earth. It pushes apart these plates. As it rises, it's going to, erupt lava. Well, it's magma when it's in the crust, and then when it reaches the surface, it will erupt out as lava. And that's what forms your oceanic crust, which is thinner. Like, eventually the oceanic crust, because it's dense, it's made up of very like mafic minerals, which are like rich in magnesium and iron, and because those are denser than the continental crust, and the continental crust is thicker, usually what happens is the oceanic crust recycles itself and subducts under, and that's where you would get like the Marianas Trench, like that's a big subduction zone, like that's formed that trench because it's like subducting under. And sometimes you get, so
when you're saying subducting, do you mean like slipping under?
Yeah, slipping under the continental crust because it's denser. The continental crust is silica rich, the continental crust is thicker. That's your second type of crust. Like, it's a lot thicker than your oceanic crust, and your oceanic crust is going to slip under like that continental crust, like, and basically like recycle itself over geological time. And that's why we don't see much of like these ancient oceans like that once upon a time like existed. Like, most of them are usually recycled unless you get a piece of crust that was accidentally abducted onto, and that's another geological time, abducted onto the onto the continental crust rather than subducted. But it kind of like, there's a lot going on, and also there's a lot to think about when it comes to like plate tectonics and stuff. But
so what defined the shape of the plates?
What defined them? It just depends on where you've got upwhelming of like different, like the heat source and stuff from like the inner core and the outer core, like in that mantle, like they're changing all of the time.
Oh, right, okay.
Once you like run out of oceanic crust, like not all the time, when I say all the time, it's not all the time over geological time. There's been times during like Earth's history where the continents have all came together and then they split apart again. It just depends on like, the heat involved in that. Like, it's all driven by this mantle convection and like what's known as slab push and slab pull. So it's pushing like away from each other when you have a divergent plate boundary, and then it's pulling down. Like, and I need to actually draw this second bit for it to make sense. But I've kind of drawn the first one already, which is like on this like wee diagram here. But basically, like this is like. I might actually redraw it, I don't know. This is the oceanic crust like this. I'm going to redraw it. Can I do that? Is that all right?
You crack on.
We could cut it out. Well, we don't have to cut it out. So basically, this is our like oceanic crust, right? And we're going to actually draw here like a little kind of like ridge. Because when you look at a map of like of the world and you zoom into like something like the North Atlantic Ocean, you can see the ridge. They've put the map of like the oceans and stuff on Google Earth so that you can see all the ridges, so you can see where it's been spreading apart, and there's this massive crack like that runs down like through like in between the Eurasian plate and the North American plate. So it's proper madness like when you think about it. But basically this is continental crust. This is your first kind of like plate boundary, which is known as a convergent plate boundary, right? You get 3 different types of plate boundaries. So this is convergent. So this is the sea. This is just a basic diagram, right? Oh no. This is your oceanic crust, which is a lot thinner. As I said before, oceanic crust is the new lava that kind of spews out like and crystallizes very quickly, like usually basaltic in composition. And obviously right under like kind of here, so like, I'll go back to black. Your oceanic and your continental crust is known as the lithosphere in geology, but the lithosphere also has like a little part of like the kind of mantle, like the top part of like the mantle, like underneath it. But then you have the asthenosphere. I don't know if I spelled that right, and I should know how to spell it because I'm a geologist. But what happens is you've got like heat that's like kind of coming up the way, like from like the outer core, like and the inner core, they're very hot. And as that heat rises, it's going to produce like, magma's going to like kind of intrude into the crust. It's going to erupt at the surface as lava. And then it starts pushing these plates away like from side to side. And you've got new oceanic crust like developing. But it's also like pushing like that top layer like of the lithosphere, the asthenosphere, like, and the lithosphere as well with it. And eventually once this like oceanic crust meets continental crust, which is a lot thicker, like it starts subducting under it, and then you get the process like it kind of like forms these convection currents like eventually, and you get the process of like mantle convection happening, which is all kind of intertwines with like geology and that. But when this is happening, and obviously this plate, the continental plate's moving that way and the oceanic plate's subducting under it, you get a lot of metamorphism related to like this piece of crust, like the continental crust.
What's like, metamorphism?
Sorry. Metamorphism is when rocks change over geological time. Like, so I've got a few in the background with me today, like, and we see a lot of these rocks in Scotland, like in the Highlands of Scotland. That's what makes up the Highlands of Scotland, and this is where we can actually look at the rock record in the Highlands of Scotland and look at some of the features that we can see as well in Scotland and tie them in with what actually happened, like with like plate tectonics, and we can see that there used to be a big massive mountain building event known as the Caledonian orogeny, like between 390 and 490 million years ago, that happened due to plate tectonics. And this was happening like in Scotland like back 390 to 490 million years ago, where we had 2 continents collide with each other eventually, because this convergent plate boundary, like that was like subducting underneath, like this was Scotland, right, which was known as a continent known as Laurentia back then, and Laurentia was actually North America, Greenland, and us joined together, right, like, and then England was just kind of being carried, like, maybe not in the middle of like I've probably drawn that wrong. England, which was on a continent known as Avalonia, was being carried by this plate, like by this oceanic plate, and eventually England, Avalonia, even though it was a lot smaller, it collided with Scotland, and it caused all this mountain building like to form, like, and all these rocks that were originally horizontal were originally like sedimentary, and some igneous rocks. Igneous rocks are volcanic in origin, like they're either lavas or magmas. Sedimentary rocks are ones that have accumulated over geological time as sediments, like usually sandstones, siltstones, mudstones. Like, they were all caught up in this and squeezed and pushed and foliated and put under ductile deformation, that they all ended up like foliated and a mess, like, and changed over geological time. That's what metamorphism is basically when rocks change, and you get metamorphism, which is known as regional metamorphism, related to convergent plate boundaries. Like, that's where you get your regional metamorphism. But you also get what's known as like granitic intrusions. I can't spell metamor. How could I like not spell that there? That's baby brain. So what happens as well is, like, as this plate's subducting like down, you get partial melting of the mantle like down here, which then like goes through the crust and forms these like granitic intrusions, which is like what forms your rock type known as granite. And this is granite up here. I'm gonna go get it because I like it. This is actually from like Glencoe area. And we can look at Scotland, like at the Cairngorms, the Aberdeen granite, Glencoe, like all of them have like these granitic intrusions that like obviously went into the crust. My drawing up here looks a lot nicer, like, because I spent time on that one.
So is that why granite is so hard, because it's right at the coal face is probably the wrong term to use, to getting pushed together? Is that why the rocks...
granite isn't the one that got pushed together. Granite is very hard because of the way it formed. It's crystalline, right? So when you've got these magma, like, you know, like the ones here, like moving through the crust, like, and I'll just point to them and stuff, like, they're ascending through the crust and they want to kind of get to the surface and erupt and form volcanoes. In which they do eventually form volcanoes, but when they're in the crust, like, this is known as an intrusive igneous rock. So granite, like, will crystallise very slowly over geological time, and that's why the crystals are so big and they interlock with each other, making granite very hard. But granite's a silica-rich rock. It only usually forms at convergent plate boundaries, which is what we have here, a convergent plate boundary where two plates have kind of met and collided with each other, and you've got the subduction of one plate, and that subduction, like that subducting slab, has created this like melt of like the crust. Because when you've got heat involved and you've got the slab subducting under of this continent, of this oceanic crust, it's gonna melt things and the heat involved in that, but it's also squeezing and pushing, like, and foliating these other rocks, which are known as your schists, like, which are very shiny and make up the majority of like the Scottish Highlands. They're really, really, I mean, you can see some folds in this, but you might not be able to like pick up on the camera. I don't know if I was sitting there or not, but I will. But there's like little foliations and stuff in this rock. Like, and this rock once upon a time was horizontal, and it's been squeezed, pushed, foliated, and gotten to the point where it's been heated that much that it's allowed other minerals to grow, chemical reactions to go on. And again, this is over millions of years. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. And this subducting plate's been subducting under the continental crust very, very slowly over like geological time as well. Maybe like it depends on where you are and stuff, but maybe like 2 centimeters to 15 centimeters a year. It just depends on what's involved and stuff in that. But we can see evidence for this, and this is the thing, like plate tectonics, like you can see evidence for like in the rock record even now. Like, even though there's been erosion and all sorts happen in Scotland, you can still see that, like, you know. So that's your first like kind of like plate boundary. And then like your second plate boundary would be like where you have new crust forming, which I actually kind of went into detail here. Like, that's your second plate boundary, like in like that section, and like there is where you have like two plates like kind of move away from each other, like, and this usually forms like an ocean, like, because when you look at like East Africa, for instance, like you've got like the East African like plate is splitting away like from like the African plate, and you've got a new ocean forming in that section of Africa. Like, and I might actually be able to show it on here. There's like, if I zoom right into that, there's like a plate in there that's kind of moving away from each other, creating this new ocean in between, like, you know, East Africa, or well, at the eastern side of Africa. Like, which is madness. Like, it's absolutely brilliant. But we also see like that when you've got like two oceanic plates moving away from each other, like that's obviously like caused by like the Mantle convection again, as I said, like it's upwhelming, like, you know, and it's like moving like either side of it, and then it kind of, you know, it subducts somewhere or whatever, and then goes the other way. Like, again, like that's your Mantle convection there. That kind of drives it, and you've got slab push it, like this bit in here where you've got the lavas, like the new crust forming, it's pushing it, and then it'll pull it down, the crust will pull it down at your subduction zone. That's your, you know, your second type of plate boundary, which is known as a divergent plate boundary. And then your third type of plate boundary is your, I'm not even going to try draw it because it gets like really, when I try draw, I like strike slip. Wait a minute, put this back.
Put your rock back.
When I try draw, it's better explaining it with my hands, but when I try draw, I strike slip like plate boundary, which is known as a transform plate boundary. It just goes, it gets a little bit messy, so I'm just going to like show you instead. Like a strike slip plate boundary is where two plates slide past each other, which is known as the transform plate boundary, right? So when you think about the San Andreas fault today, that's a strike slip plate boundary, where the two plates are just moving slowly past each other, but every now and then they get stuck, and then they just go and cause earthquakes.
Build up in energy, basically, yeah.
But then you get volcanoes that form at the subduction, the convergent plate boundary, which is related to your granites. And you also have volcanoes that form at your mid-oceanic ridges as well, but they're underwater usually. But in some cases, you do have, like, for instance, Iceland. Like, you do have, like, new lava being erupted at the surface, but Iceland sits on that boundary, like, between the North Atlantic Ocean. So as the Eurasian plate, like, is moving away from the North American plate, like, there's actually a hot spot that sits underneath, like, Iceland, which is another kind of explanation, like, because back in the day when they looked at volcanoes and stuff, they were like, oh, well, how do we get these volcanoes, like, in Iceland and Hawaii, when there's not actually, that there, because usually volcanoes are related to subduction zones and convergent plate boundaries where two plates meet. They're not but then they noticed in the rock record, and they noticed, oh, well, there's plate boundaries also relating to, there's volcanism also related to, places like Iceland and Hawaii and the Canary Islands, like Gran Canaria and Tenerife and that. Like, that's because there's, like, these other things known as mantle plumes that come up, like, through the crust, like, from the mantle, and, like, also spew out basaltic magma. So when you have that combined with a plate boundary, you have, more volcanism. And we can see that on the west coast of Scotland. Like, there's evidence in Scotland of, like, volcanism related to, like, in the geological record, like, to the opening of the Atlantic Ocean, because the Atlantic Ocean, like, started opening, like, when was it? Maybe 150 million years ago, and you had a supercontinent before that where all the continents were joined together, known as Pangaea. And that started, like, opening up and, like, forming, like, this new ocean, like, this new oceanic crust. And we were just on the edge of that. So you see a lot of volcanism related to that on the Isle of Skye, on the Isle of Mull, that's around 60 million years old. Like, so midway through this, like, splitting up, like, of, like, the crust, like, and it's just madness to, like, look and see that Scotland's underwent that as well. And when I was going on about the transform, like, plate boundary where the two plates slid past each other, we've got one of them in Scotland too. When you look at a topographic map of, like, where of Scotland, of where Loch Ness is and that, and Loch Linnhe and stuff, like, there's a cut, like, a straight line that goes right through Scotland. That's a straight slit fault line, because the rocks on either side of it don't match up. Like, it's mental, like, so, when you look at it.
So I take it these zones, some of them are more active than others in terms of their movement. That's why we don't see earthquakes like you see in other parts of the world. Yeah, definitely.
We once upon a time probably did see earthquakes that big, like when the plates were active, like in our country, like, but you're talking like 400 odd million years ago or 350. Like, but now, like, as I said, like, plate tectonics is constantly changing over geological time, so it doesn't happen overnight. And plates recycle themselves. Once they've recycled themselves, there's no more plate to subduct. Eventually, like, if you've got, like, a plate boundary that was convergent, like where you had, like, Avalonia, which was England, hit, like, Laurentia, like, that eventually is just going to combine. And, like, you're just going to end up with, like, this big massive piece of continental crust. And that subducting plate just ends up breaking off, gets recycled, melts, probably in the crust. And you've now got, like, these two plates have joined together, and they start thickening, and you've got uplift, and you've got mountain building and stuff, which is how the Himalayas are forming today, right? Like, and the Alps as well, that those are two subduction plates, and we see evidence for that in Scotland as well, in the Highlands. But when you look, continental, obviously thickening's happening, and you've got all these thrust faults, you've got the metamorphism, you've still got, like, the granitic intrusions that have kind of, like, intruded into the crust that are erupting at the surface as volcanoes. But when you look at the Himalayas and stuff, obviously the Indian plate is, like, moved north, like, and collided with the Asian plate? I can't remember. And as that's moved north, that's only happened 60 odd million years ago, 65 million years ago, that was moving up. And when you look at the Mount Everest, like, the top of Mount Everest, like, has got limestone on it. Limestone forms in a marine environment. It's a sedimentary rock that's made up of fossils and that, like calcium carbonate, like marine life. And that's sitting at the highest mountain, like in the world. Like that's madness to me that's
incredible.
Only took 60 odd million years, even though it might seem like a long time to you and to the normal person. But for me, I'm thinking Earth's 4.6 billion years old, right? So 60 million years is like not that bad. No. Like in terms of geology, that's really quick. And you think that happened over that time period where you've had the two plates collide, you've had also the ocean that sat in between India and Asia and that, like, disappear, like similar to what happened in Scotland back in the day. And it's like basically, like ended up crushing all this, like, and forming a mountain chain, like so at the edge of the plates.
Are all mountains subject to this?
So so when you've got like mountain chains such as like the Himalayas, the Alps, the Chile mountains as well, there's a subducting plate like all the way down like that.
So the big mountain ridges.
That edge. So when you've got big mountain ranges like those, they're all related to convergent plate boundaries.
Like the Rocky Mountains and...
Yeah, Rockies as well. Yeah, they're all related because there's been a subduction zone that's kind of went under and pushed like these two plates together. And sometimes you still might have oceanic plate the other side still pushing it. When you look at the side of America that's like got the obviously you've got the strike slip plate down near California, but there's also been a subduction like further north, like where you have the Rocky Mountains. And then when you look at the Chile side as well, like the Chile side, you've got like the subducting plate as well, like this went under. So they are related to like mountain building events. And the rocks that we see at the surface in Scotland, for instance, these rocks here, like they formed like 20, 30 kilometres deep within the Earth's crust. So once upon a time, we must have had mountains that were higher than the Himalayas or the same size as the Himalayas, but they've obviously been eroded away over geological time. Well,
so that's
it's mental.
That's incredible. And does it impact how like rare minerals are formed?
Sometimes it does, yeah, because obviously, like if you've got granitic intrusions forming, that contains sometimes some of your rare earth elements, like your minerals that you need, like for raw materials nowadays. You know, like your iPad or whatever, like your all of the lithium and stuff that they're trying to mine, like down south, like the magmatic processes involved in like even two plates colliding. You've also got a lot of stuff going on in geology. It's forming different fault lines. A fault line's usually a crack in the crust, like that you can have as well hydrothermal fluids running through the crust that are magmatic in origin, that are going to contain your elements that are your minerals that are required for us to, you know, be able to make these things, like to be able to record this podcast, you know. Like they're everywhere, and people forget that about geology. Is like geologists actually find your stuff that you need, like, but don't look at it as in a bad way, because there's a lot of controversy to do with these subjects.
Yeah, like cobalt.
Yeah, that's it. It's like, that's killing me. I'm like, the way that we live nowadays, honestly. And then oil and gas was another one. That's obviously a fossil fuel and stuff. But yeah, these rocks that you see at the surface in Scotland, it's just madness to think that some of them do contain like.
But in Scotland, I think it's quite a good way to, obviously in a much shorter time, like normal people, human time.
Yeah.
You can see the social difference it's made in Scotland. So at one side of Scotland, you've got the Highlands.
You do, yeah.
Which predominantly was Gaelic speaking, and it was all about kinship and farming. Then in the Lowlands, it's much more rich land where they could do a lot of farming, and they ended up speaking a different language and ended up forming more trade. And that's how you got the major cities in Scotland growing up, like your Glasgow's, your Edinburgh's, your Dundee.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how these plates actually have like historical human impact in terms of how we all develop, and you can probably multiply that right across the whole world.
Oh, it's mental, yeah. Like you're right in saying that. Like there's like these important like kind of fault lines and stuff that separate us, like in Scotland. Like when you look at the geology in Scotland, I'll probably do an episode at one point on the geology of Scotland as well and talk about that. Like I was going to try bring up a geological map of Scotland, but I can't remember what presentation it's in, and I'm just like, oh.
So a question that I've always wondered when you're talking about that. So Scotland's said to have one of the oldest rocks available. Is that right?
It's got one of the oldest rocks, and it's sitting right behind you, like in the world.
So
I mean, in Britain and in the UK, yeah. Like
how
so
can a rock? How can a rock be older than another rock? How do you know that's?
How can a rock what?
Be older than another rock?
Oh, right, okay. They usually use radiometric dating to like date rocks, so they'll use like isotopes within the rock, whether that's like counting up the number of like uranium elements that they find in a certain crystal mineral in the rock, like and counting up as well the number of that the decay element, which would be lead in this case. If it was uranium decays to lead over geological time. They can count up all these numbers and analyze them and use radiometric like kind of data to give you a number. And sometimes that number can be plus or minus. I'm actually wanting to make content on this and a video on it because it's something that like is really interesting, and people ask me a lot like, well, how do you know that that's actually that age, you know? Yeah. Like they could be making that crap up. Like, and they've dated these rocks like in the Northwest Highlands and on the Hebridean terrain, like which is the oldest terrain in Scotland, to be up to 3 billion years old in certain areas. Like they're ancient. Like compared to the rest of like Scotland, like I mean, well, Scotland's got a variety of different rocks. We're quite lucky here that you can travel 500 miles or so and come across all these different rock types and all these different geological terrains and that. Like, but your Luisa gneiss, which is that rock there, like that's been metamorphosed and like buried to immense depths and pressures, and that was even caught up in a mountain building event like before the one that I speak about, the Caledonian orogeny. That was caught up in like a few like back in the day, because it is 3 billion years old and where the Earth's 4.6 billion years old, so it's quite an ancient piece of crust, yeah. But it's actually part of like what's known as the North Atlantic craton, and we find that a craton in geology is a piece of crust that's quite thick, so it doesn't really get recycled in plate tectonics because it's too thick. It's like continental crust, it's too thick to kind of be subducted under anything. Like usually it's oceanic crust that gets subducted under like continental crust, so it just kind of sits there like and floats on top of like, you know, the asthenosphere and the mantle, like, and you get cratons across like the world. Like there's one in Africa, there's one in like, you know, like the North Atlantic craton is what's part like forms part of like the northern kind of side of like the Hebridean, like the Outer Hebrides and that, and also forms part of Greenland. And you find in Canada as well, like you find, I think the oldest rocks in the world I think are in Canada or something, or I might be wrong, they might be in Norway. I'll need to look that one up to be honest, but we do have some ancient rocks, like, and that's how they would usually date them. Yeah, sorry, I went on off on a tangent.
No, that was perfect.
They use different elements basically. It's not just uranium and lead. There's like nebidium and strontium. There's what are the other ones? They can use carbon for rocks that aren't as like old as, you know, and that's how they date like, you know, ice caps and stuff. And they usually use carbon like for stuff like that because that's recent times in geology. But these kind of, you know, rocks like that are ancient. Yeah.
So you've said two things: continental drift and plate tectonics. Are they the same?
Yeah, kind of. Continental drift's basically the continent. It's like the theory of the continent's like just kind of floating on top of like this asthenosphere, like this mantle that's moving, like the part of the lithosphere, the crust. Like continental drift is like looking at the continents and thinking, oh well, did they once fit together? Yeah, they did. Like they looked like they did. Like at one point in geological time, you can see that it's like clear by looking at like the not geological map, normal map of just the world. Google Earth, bring it up next time you're on it and have a look. You'll see they've put even the oceanic floor, having that on there, it gives you an indication of where the crust is just split apart.
Can it ever stop? Is there anything?
Eventually, once the heat runs out on Earth, it'll stop. I think, I mean, there's a lot of controversy to do with it in geology, and geologists are always going to argue against each other, but yeah, it could stop one day because it's driven by the heat that's coming from the core, and we're cooling down. The core's cooling down over millions and millions of years. Like we used to be probably a lot hotter when the Earth first formed. Like when it did first form, we were bombarded by just loads of debris like that accumulated, and what you had was a process known as differentiation. So all of the heavy elements such as magnesium, nickel, iron, they sunk to the bottom, and that's why our core is made up of iron, which is usually what meteorites are made up of. When you see a meteorite, honestly, I had one in my hand at the London Gem and Mineral Show recently, and I was like, this thing's heavy. Like, but I really want a piece.
Dense?
It's super dense. It's heavy. That's the core, like, of Earth. There's heat coming from that. Like, the core of the Earth, it's mental. It's like, actually, they've estimated it to be around the same temperature as the sun's surface
Wow.
at 5,500 degrees Celsius, you're thinking, what? Oh my God, this is mental, this is hot. So, that stuff, basaltic lava, which is the freshest rock. So you've got your oldest rock that's sitting next to you against the youngest rock I own, which is from Iceland. Like, it's basalt, and it's new lava that erupted out the volcano, which was last year.
Between these two?
So that
Age-wise?
black one that you're age-wise, that's a year old.
Is that only a year old?
Yeah, that's a year old.
Wow.
July 20. Wait a minute, is that a year old? A year and a half old now? I'm like, wait a minute.
And it's super light.
It's super light. It's made up of like hardly anything.
And that one's very dense.
3 billion years old.
Wow.
It's mental that you have those two in your hand. That's a metamorphic rock, and that's an igneous rock. Igneous.
Do you not struggle to get your head around the passage of time? See when you're saying...
I think just because I don't know why, because...
I can't even work that out in my head.
You're like, what?
I'm trying to picture 3 billion and it's...
Oh, I know, it's hard. I don't know why. I think for me as a geologist, and I think most geologists think this way, is we look at things a little bit differently. So, even when I look at a landscape, and I can imagine, not that there was a volcano there or something like that. When I go up through Glencoe and you've got the beautiful mountains and the scenery and stuff, I'm imagining being inside a volcano or being at the surface of where you've had the lava. The magma when it reaches the surface, it's magma when it's in the crust, and it's lava when it comes out. When that's reached the surface and spewed out as lava, I'm imagining being there and seeing it. And that's another thing I forgot to actually mention about convergent plate boundaries, where you've got these granites, wherever I put the granite, forming, and obviously you can see evidence of this at Glencoe and Scotland. It's pushed through the crust, this magma chamber that's now kind of at the surface, but you've got the lavas associated with that magma chamber, which is a rock type known as rhyolite. And you've got all of these tuffs and pyroclastic flows, and evidence in the rock layers of very violent eruptions. Usually you get violent eruptions associated with convergent plate boundaries. So when you look at Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius is sitting on a convergent plate boundary in Italy. The reason it is the way that it is, and the reason it erupts the way that it erupts, is because the granite is a very, very, it contains a lot of gases, and it, when it gets to the surface, it's going to just go boom. But that stuff, the magma that erupts at a divergent plate boundary where two plates are moving away from each other, basalt, is very calm-like, and it doesn't cause explosive eruptions. It just kind of bubbles out as a fissure, and
so
it looks pretty.
So the actual explosions you see from volcanoes are actually caused by the type of rock.
The type of rock and the type of plate boundary that you're at as well also relates to the type of volcanism that you'll get.
What about Yellowstone then, the supervolcano that everyone keeps an eye on in case it white?
I don't actually know enough about Yellowstone, so I probably couldn't talk about it, and I wouldn't want to say something wrong about it.
But is that on a fault line?
It'll be on a plate boundary or close to a plate boundary, and I'm guessing it's going to be on a convergent plate boundary because of the volcanism that's been related to it. And there's meant to be a big, massive magma chamber, and people do worry about it and stuff. And I get people asking me, "What happens if that goes off?" And I'm like, "Could they tell you?" I don't know enough about that.
Anyone can tell. So
probably, yeah. There's probably going to be a lot of gases in that, and a lot of pyroclastic stuff.
Yeah, it's not good.
Coming out, no. But that's happened in the past. We've had super volcanoes before, and it'll happen again. One of the super volcanoes, back in the day, towards the end of the Permian period, caused a mass extinction. And it was known as the Siberian Traps. 250 million years ago. That's what I mean when I say Permian period. It's when we were all kind of together on the supercontinent known as Pangaea. So everything was kind of bundled up together. Scotland was situated just north of the equator.
Oh, lovely.
And we had desert-like conditions, so similar to the Sahara Desert. You can see these rocks in Dumfries if anyone ever wants to go see them, or you can see them on Arran.
Is that why there's a lot of
new sandstone? That's why you've got the sandstone tenements. They're made up of your new red sandstone. Yeah, I want to do an episode on that as well at one point. So that volcanism towards the end of the Permian period killed 95% of marine life at the time, which was madness. It was one of the biggest extinctions, and it was related to what's known as the Siberian Traps, which was just lots of volcanism And the volcanism is also related to the plate tectonics. Like, you know, at the time, the period of time, 250 million years ago. And because it was spewing out all of this stuff, and yes, it did take a longer period of time. It didn't just happen overnight. It took millions of years for it to change the atmosphere and stuff like that. But life wasn't fast enough to catch up with that. And it ended up like most of life died out. Like, but we, you know, it's still recovered and we still evolved. Like, I mean, we're here.
Yeah.
But it's just mental when you think about how plate tectonics can have an impact on that. And I'm not trying to say that, oh yeah, climate change has happened like before in the past, because there's a lot of controversy when it comes to that kind of stuff, and people don't believe it, and people are like, oh, it's happened in the past, it doesn't matter that it's happening now, it's the rate that it's happening at now. Like, it's the rate that when you look at a graph of, yeah, you see this graph, which is probably one of the most important graphs in climate change and stuff, and you see like it going up and down, you see the temperature and you see the CO2 go up and down. It's the rate that the CO2s went up in the last 100 years, like caused by humans. We don't know how that's going to impact us and stuff. I mean, I tend to stay away from the subject anyway, because I'm just like, I don't like talking about it, you know, because everyone's always going to have their own opinion and stuff on it.
Yeah, if you don't be,
and you don't know, that's the thing, I don't know what's going to happen in like the next million years or so, or next 1,000 years. I always talk in geological time, even though I'm not going to be here, so... It's mental though how plate tectonics can tie in with super volcanoes and volcanoes and metamorphism as well, like and earthquakes. Like, it's all really, that's how we get all of these things, earthquakes and metamorphism and all that stuff happening.
So in Scotland we've got a lot of dormant volcanoes, like Edinburgh Castle's built on one. There's lots of dormant volcanoes. Why are they dormant? If there's, are they still on a tectonic plate, or have they shifted away? Oh no,
they've shifted. We've shifted away. That tectonic plate's no longer active anymore. There's evidence for it being there. Like, you can see that in the crust and in the rocks, and obviously in the
so a tectonic plate itself can cease and join together and form
and
a
just
solid bit of
basically
land.
And that's what's happened in Scotland. We're made up of different different geological terrains. That's what we refer to them as. Like, we're made up of 5 different geological terrains, and they all amalgamated together during the Caledonian Orogeny, which was a big mountain building event, where you had the closure of an old ocean that sat between England and Scotland. And England was on Avalonia, and Scotland was on Laurentia. So we were on this bigger continent joined on to North America and Greenland, and then England just kind of sat by itself on Avalonia and just kind of drifted northwards as this old ocean. So we once had independence, you know, like and like it just collided with Scotland and joined up to basically like Laurentia, like, and formed another continent known as Laurussia, like Laurussia. I can never pronounce it. So. Yeah, like that happened and amalgamated all of these continents together. But you've got different volcanism related to, like, obviously you've got the magma chambers, and I really need to find that map of like Scotland. I wish I actually had it. Oh no, did that disconnect? I don't know.
No, you're fine.
I wish I had it, but I can't seem to find it anywhere. Like, I probably should have looked it up earlier on. It's just because I've got like so many different talks that I've done recently, and the geology of it might be in this. Yeah, hopefully it's in this. But when you look at a geological map of Scotland, it's so varied. And I like to get the map out before my tours, and I like to go into details about, this is the geological history of Scotland, so that you guys know what you are looking at. And there's been different periods of time where there's been volcanism related to different plate tectonics and stuff, like, and it's just madness. Like, but we can, go into it and dive into it in another episode.
That's a whole other episode,
honestly, there's you can talk about quite a lot of stuff.
So from plate tectonics, we found it?
Yeah, that's the geological, and that's the period, well, it's kind of like the eons, the periods of time that you've got, you know. I tend to refer to the periods of time like from Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, Permian, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, Paleogene, Neogene, Quaternary. We're in the Holocene now, like Quaternary.
What's your favourite one?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. I've spelt Jurassic wrong, I think. Maybe Jurassic, and no, maybe not.
It's got to be Jurassic, surely.
Yeah, because of the dinosaurs. No, probably like the. I don't have a favourite one.
So do we know where we're going then with these tectonic plates? Do we know we'll end up
so
eventually?
it's cool because you could put into YouTube what they project the tectonic plates are going to do over the next 250 million years. It'll show you a kind of like what they call diagram illustration of it happening, and it'll show you what they're doing, and it'll show you what's going to happen. So, like for instance, the Mediterranean Sea is going to close up.
Oh wow!
And you'll have like Africa, because the African plate is subducting under the Eurasian plate and moving northward, and that's what's creating the Alps. So eventually,
the Alps are
that
gonna get
Mediterranean,
Yeah.
Alps will get higher, and Mediterranean will shut. It'll maybe squeeze us a wee bit as well in the process. I don't know. We might be all right. You can see evidence of it as well, like the Alps, the collision of like the two plates, even just at that boundary, like where you've got the Alps forming. You can see evidence in South England and Cornwall of like the rocks where they were like horizontal and they're now like buckled and foliated, but they're not metamorphosed because they don't have the heat and pressure. But because they've felt the pressure, of like the plates colliding with each other, it's of those two plates, even though they're I don't know how many 1,000 miles away. Like it's still, you can see evidence of it in the rock. It's just madness. So I think it's amazing. Sorry.
See ice ages and would an ice age have any impact on the continental plates at all, or are they totally unrelated?
They're unrelated. But what an ice age can do is it can reveal like the rocks that have been buried deep within a mountain chain, for instance. Like, the reason we have our rocks at the surface, and when you look at like this map that I've got up here, all of the green stuff like in here, like and the yellow stuff in the north, like those are all metamorphic rocks, and then you've got your red granite, like granitic like magma chambers that formed deep within the crust. These were all once upon a time 20-30 kilometres in the crust. They've obviously been eroded over geological time, and the thing is with ice and ice ages and that it does erode and like weather away a lot quicker than some of the other processes involved, like, and that's what's exposed some of these rocks that we see at the surface today and cut into some of the magma chambers, because there has been like I don't know how many ice ages there's been where the ice is retreated, and over obviously the Quaternary period, which was between 2.6 and 11,500 years ago, or above the Holocene. There's been several ice ages that have cut the landscapes that we can see today in Scotland and cut all your glens out, your U-shaped valleys, your lochs, like when you think about it, the Great Glen Fault, which is a fault line that runs from Inverness all the way down, like through Fort William, and that was a strike slip fault at once upon a time. Those rocks in the middle there are a lot weaker. See the actual like Loch Ness, like that's been like obviously dug out by a glacier, because the rocks like that form when you have a strike slip plate boundary, because that strike slip plate boundary is like moving like from side to side, it's causing all these rocks in the middle to crumble up and break apart and become brecciated and form a rock type known as myelinite. And when myelinite's like exposed to erosion and weather and like ice and stuff, the ice is just going to cut right through it, and that's why that's so deep. Like you've got those lochs that run through, and you've got this straight line that runs through Scotland, like is because of the rock, like because it's associated with the plate tectonics, the rock that's formed in between that plate, like those two plates at one point, like so that was a plate boundary, the Great Glen Fault at once upon a time, like, and that's ended up like just eroding away, and you now have a loch that's deeper than the surrounding ocean around Scotland, like, which is mental, like. I just find that fascinating. That's where Nessie's living. Just in case you were wondering. Like I'm kidding on.
And this is real.
That's his house. He's in the Great Glen Fault. No, but we look at the different like geological terrains. I'll probably do a separate episode on this, like, and speak about the geological history of Scotland at one point once we get over all of the basics. Like, and because we're starting, So Jesus. This is basics. Is just plate tectonics. Is and this is why you have to go into different basics to do with geology, and we'll probably do an episode just on metamorphic rocks and just on igneous rocks, and we might repeat ourselves a few times and tie it in with plate tectonics, but like it all ties in again in the end, and As long as people enjoy it, it's the main
No,
thing.
that,
As long as you're learning too.
Absolutely. I'm standing on my
You're
tiptoes
getting
learning.
like good
I'm
geology lessons.
Absolutely. I was worried when you said it was the basics.
You're like, basics, what?
Basics, what?
This is so complicated.
So your tours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you had people travel from the States and whatnot
I have,
to come?
yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so
Uh-huh.
I get
For the sole
inquiries
purpose
as well.
coming over to do
Just to come
That's
over
incredible.
and come on a wee tour with me.
So what happens in one of your tours? What do you do?
It depends on if it's like a 2 hour tour. Like, so I offer different kinds of tours. I offer ones that are, local to like just in Scotland, that are maybe like a 2 hour walk or so, that like kind of allow people to come along and learn about maybe the area that they live in, or you can book onto it and you could live like a distance away and just travel, I guess, to it. But so I offer like afternoon, and I'll be offering evening tours from April onwards once the daylight hours are a little bit better. And they're usually 2 hours. Pick up from Glasgow's available, like, which usually happens an hour and a half before the actual tour starts. And I tend to just meet people at the location that we're going to meet at. And what I do is, like, I'll take them through a journey through geological time. I'll kind of explain the geology of Scotland at the beginning. We then go down and look at the rocks in that area and explain in basic terms what things are, and people love it. They just want to come meet me as well, but they absolutely love it because it's something new. They've never really thought about rocks. Like, I even, like, honestly, like, I get recognised in the street. And like now, just for making videos about rocks, I was sitting in Hamilton McDonald's the other day, like having my breakfast, and this guy came up to me and he was like, "I'm so sorry for interrupting you, but I just wanted to say, like, I absolutely love your videos. Like, they're absolutely amazing. I never thought about geology before, and you've introduced this whole new subject to me that's forgotten about." And I'm like,
that's
"Oh,
what I
thank
found
you.
your videos.
That,
It's, I think most folk have an interest in this, but it's probably out of reach. Until somebody explains it.
Until someone explains, because that's the thing. They've overcomplicated the subject of geology for so long now, and I was like, people, we need to make this basic. But anyway, the tours, so it ranges from the 2 hour tours to then the day trips that I'm going to start offering this year, to actual weekend trips away. So I've got bookings already on some of I'm offering like one every month. I think July I've got 2 where I take people away on a weekend, away up to the the Highlands, the Isle of Skye, the Isle of Mull, the Outer Hebrides. And I tend to say to people, listen, like, book your own accommodation because everyone's different. But you can come along. Like, I have 7 seats, and I've got my own minibus. Like, I've got 7 seats, so I can take 7 people with me. You can book on, come along and learn a little bit more about the geology of a specific area in Scotland. And people love it. They also just want to meet me because of like who I am. And I remember I had like one lady like on one of my tours last year that was just like, "You're exactly like your videos." Because I kept saying, "And this is mad. You see how mad this is?" And she was like, "Oh my God, you said the mad word."
It would be funny if you had a very posh accent in real life. And you were,
imagine. It's like, we're going to look at... I can't even do a posh accent, you know that?
Your posh accent was still slang.
Yeah. I don't even want to try it.
So how do they, if somebody's wanting to book a tour, what do they do?
So you can go to my website, which is www.scottishgeologist.co.uk. And I've got the tours advertised on there already for this year. However, if you're interested in a private tour, you can book onto a private tour instead, where if it was, for instance, you and your partner that just wanted to spend the day with me, like, and go out on an adventure, whether that was Isle of Skye or the Northwest Highlands or a few days, like, you can book like by day basically, like, as long as I was available on those days and stuff. But I tend to say, go on the website, check that out first. If not, then you can email me as well at louisa@scottishgeologist.co.uk and find out a little bit more information about what like we can do. And people love it. It's not the thing is, I was like worried in case no one would be interested in it at all, but I found that the tours have been really popular, like, and they've just taken off, and I'm just like, wow, I can't believe I'm talking about rocks for a living. Imagine that. Like, imagine just taking people out and talking to them about rocks and tying it in with why things look the way that they look, and people love it. I think it's madness that I'm doing that now. Like, it's not just the only thing I'm doing. I'm doing, like, obviously other things too, but yeah, I love it. Yeah. I think
do something you love and you never work a day in your life.
That's it. Yeah. I honestly don't like feel like I'm working like a day in my life sometimes, but
So will we fit another one of these in, do you think, before little Gabriel comes
Hopefully.
along?
I was going to ask that. I think so.
Yeah.
As long as he doesn't make an appearance within the next week, because I'm getting so big now. I'm just like, when are you going to come out? To be honest, I'm getting to the point as well during my pregnancy.
Are you fed up yet?
Oh, I'm fed up. I'm like, hurry up and like, just get out. My wee baby, Geo baby or baby Solace, that's his nickname.
So on the next one, we'll either be talking about something else or you'll be sitting here with a baby.
I know. Hiya. No, like we'll see. I'm trying to think. Like I don't know what I'll make the next one on. It probably will start with the basics. Maybe like start going into like different rock types and stuff. We'll see.
Nice one. We'll keep it simple for me.
I will do. Aye. Have you got any more questions about the tectonics and that?
No, I'm done. I'm away for a lie down.
But I need to go nap. That was a lot of information here. Oh my goodness. Aye, no, good stuff.
See you soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Thank you.